Welcome to the On the Move. Today we are with Samira Hamidi. Samira is Amnesty International's campaigner for South Asia and also a prominent defender of women's rights in Afghanistan. And we continue to talk about Afghanistan on the move. Welcome, Samira. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me in your program.
I have a lot of questions, so I will go right into it. The report that was recently published, The Fate of Thousands Hanging in the Balance, Afghanistan's Fall into the Hands of the Taliban is the title, documented incidents of human rights violations happening in Afghanistan since the takeover by Taliban, and stated that since assuming control of Afghanistan, the Taliban have clearly demonstrated that they are not protecting or respecting human rights. There are many testimonies of killings and most people are in hiding. This week on the Turkish news, we read that the killing of yet another woman, a member of the national volleyball team who was, I think, murdered last month. So how long this perpetual internal displacement can go on? What are the most urgent issues that the report draws attention with regards to protection of human rights in Afghanistan?
Thank you so much. As you rightly said, our report actually is a testimony of a bigger problem, of a huge challenge that Afghan people, particularly those who have been on the forefront of the work for human rights and for women's rights, for justice, for freedom of expression, have been in Afghanistan. We clearly see that while when Taliban took over, they tried to communicate through media that they will adhere to human rights and that they will respect women's rights and that they would like to work with the media and they would, of course, respect freedom of expression. But what we clearly see and what we clearly documented and verified in our report is that it's not really happening on the ground. Our fear is also that because of Taliban takeover, the situation has drastically changed. You know, access is a major issue. What we have documented is also not covering a broad range of violations and repression that Taliban are right now committing in Afghanistan outside Kabul and some of the bigger provinces where maybe internet is still working, where people have access. Our fear is that if this human rights crisis is not addressed, we will be witnessing atrocities, which will actually undermine the work that has been taken place for 20 years in Afghanistan. It will undermine the efforts of a lot of people who have taken a lot of personal and professional risks to work for rights of people in Afghanistan, to bridge the gap between the government and the people and to speak for the people across the country. Our concern is also that humanitarian crisis is really getting worse. With banks having limited access to cash, with healthcare services or running short of medical instruments and medicines, and employees and health service employees not being paid, and at the same time employment is another issue, that a lot of people have not gone back to their jobs, and if you don't go to your work, you don't get paid, and that's where you end up with financial crisis, and that's where Afghanistan is unfortunately moving.
Yeah. In the article you wrote, the Globe Post, you criticized the narratives of the American governments, and I guess the NATO allies, that blames Afghan people. And you find those narratives especially insulting for women's rights. Why?
I think what the international community, including US and NATO allies, are trying to communicate is whatever has been achieved by women in Afghanistan is because of them. which is fairly wrong. Women have been part of Afghanistan's political, social, economical sphere for decades. Women were part of political system in Afghanistan. They were part of the cabinet. They were members of the parliament and Senate. Women have advocated in the last 20 years strongly for their inclusion, for their decision-making role, for taking a lot of, personal and professional risks to reach out where women were. Just before 15 August collapse. I also find the narrative very, disturbing and insulting, is because, we left and everything fall down apart. Everything, it disappeared, which is not true. Women have strongly protested Taliban. Women are strongly reaching out to different actors, including international community, and are very concrete in their demands. For 10 years, Afghan women have been speaking to the past government, to the political leaders, to international community specifically on the peace process, on what kind of peace process Afghanistan needs, what kind of mechanism is needed, what kind of inclusion is required. Afghan women had thought about today's situation. They were thinking that this will happen if Afghanistan's conflict and peace is not handled properly, and nobody listened to Afghan women. And this is where we are. So that's where I feel like they need to give that recognition that Afghan women deserve. That it's not because of you, it's because of the struggle and hard work of a lot of Afghan women that they have put forward.
Yeah. Taliban's control over Kabul was what stirred international attention, but Amnesty's report and many other testimonies show very clearly, as you say, actually, as women's human rights defenders in Afghanistan were also saying, these violations were happening across the country long before Kabul fell, and women were barred from working in the other provinces. So why do you think the international community was taken by Taliban's charm offensive and took this wait and see approach, while it was clearly, apparent to you and women in Afghanistan what was forthcoming?
I think international community were really after quick fixes. They really wanted, a quick fix and an exit from Afghanistan. We clearly saw when they signed a deal. The United States signed a deal with the Taliban last year. They actually accepted whatever Taliban demanded. Release of 5,000, Taliban prisoners, withdrawal from Afghanistan, unconditional withdrawal. Itself was very irresponsible, and ignoring the fact that, despite of the fact that the Taliban were receiving all the treatments, 7-star hotel stay, and their travel restrictions were lifted, and they were in different platforms. They were fighting and they were violating human rights, violations in Afghanistan. I think one of the reasons that Afghanistan failed and the government collapsed was that people were not taken seriously. People were not, there were symbolic meetings that these policymakers would come to Afghanistan and will have with women's group, but they never considered those recommendations that women's group were proposing. And I think one part of the failure is that they were very much driven to their own analysis and very much driven to the past government, rather than to doing the reality check and building steps to address the conflict of Afghanistan from people's point of view, from different groups in Afghanistan, including women, and that's where unfortunately the situation turned the way we are we are witnessing it today.
Yeah. Now, with this acting government, the Women's Affairs Minister is no longer existing, and it is replaced by the Ministry of Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Vice. Why is this particularly worrying?
I think, in the last 20 years, there has been a lot of effort, including the international community who supported the women's leadership, women's decision-making role. So, Ministry of Women's Affairs was considered one of the major achievements, not only for women themselves, but also for international community, for the past government, because this whole discussion around how effective this ministry was is different. But the fact that there was this ministry, that it was addressing women's rights in Afghanistan, and today it's not, and today it does not at all exist, is quite a matter of concern, and it actually reconfirms the position and the thoughts that Taliban had when they were ruling Afghanistan in 96, and they're back with the same thoughts and narrative, that they don't believe that women should be in leadership roles. They don't believe that women deserve to have a specific allocated organization to work for them. They don't believe that women have capabilities and competence equally like men. And that's where, it's very dangerous. It's very problematic, because you actually ignore the half of the population. You just think that the way you think and the way you decide and the way you look at things is the most appropriate one, and that's where it's problematic and it's very dangerous, because these are the initial steps that are actually going to lead women's rights and girls' rights in Afghanistan into a very dangerous path, unfortunately.
The report also underlines the threat against LGBTI people and groups who are at risk of being harmed in Afghanistan under the Taliban rule. However, it was in 2018, I think also, that the Afghanistan government adopted a new penal code that explicitly criminalized same-sex relationships. So what is the situation now that awaits LGBTI people in Afghanistan under Taliban rules?
The presence or the acceptance of the LGBTI community in a country like Afghanistan is quite difficult. As you rightly said, in 2018, the new revised penal code criminalized the same-sex relationship. I think they are in far more danger, because the base and the argument that the government had put at that time was religion, and Taliban are a conservative religious group, and that's where it will severely put the life of LGBTI community at risk in Afghanistan, and I'm afraid that if they are because they are not a group that are vocal, and they are not a group that are public, and it's very much understandable because their life has always been at risk. My fear is that if they are identified, if they are hunted, unfortunately anything can happen to them.
Which seems possible because they seem to be hunting down everyone and everything, basically. And there are some reports, there are some statements in your report that there is a suspicion that someone was actually beheaded, right? I think that was in the report. Afghanistan, on top of all of these things, is facing a serious poverty, where majority of the population have no access to basic needs. This forces us to return to international aid, which Taliban seems to advocate for. Recently, Taliban told BBC that the frozen money should be unlocked. He said women's rights are an internal Afghan matter, but the international community should reconsider the aid policy. There is a huge controversy about how to deliver aid to Afghanistan. What is your take on this issue?
I think it's quite a matter of concern, of course, for all of us when we see that a country which was donor dependent, right? International aid dependent for years, for 2 decades specifically, is a, it's leaving them by their own and not taking any responsibility is also unfair. It's unfair on people because it's, at the end of the day, it's the salaries of government employees, it's the salaries of teachers, the university lecturers, it's the civilians that will suffer the most. And of course, with the United Nations efforts, that they had a conference last week in Geneva where they pledged funds for humanitarian aid in Afghanistan. There is some hope that this aid might address this emerging humanitarian crisis that Afghanistan and Afghan people are going through. But these are very difficult situations. We are not really sure in what circumstances and what plans and strategies United Nations will be able to execute this 1.2 billion US dollar funds that the donor community has pledged for Afghanistan. We of course strongly believe that international community has a important responsibility and commitment toward provision of support to people in Afghanistan. They have made specific commitments during their exit strategy statements, which included that we are disengaging militarily, but we will be continuing our development and our diplomatic contacts and support to Afghan people. And I really hope that there will be ways and there will be opportunities to support people and to basically address the immediate needs that right now people are having. And it's quite a difficult and quite a challenging situation also because I believe that the Taliban caretaker government is not competent enough. They don't have the experience of running different government institutions, governing over 35 million people in a country, and they have to work with experts. They have to bring back those people who have been part of the former government, who have the experience and the knowledge, and they have to show their commitments. They have to show their strong commitments in terms of women's rights, human rights, freedom of expression. They have to normalize the situation if they want to see peaceful and normal Afghanistan. Because they can't just repress people, commit human rights violations, and at the same time expect international recognition and international aid. I think it's a very difficult scenario that unfortunately Afghanistan is facing.
Which actually directly ties to my next question, because Taliban have nominated now an ambassador to represent Afghanistan at the United Nations. Taliban's choice of UN ambassador was Shaheen, the movement spokesman based in Doha, Qatar. And UN is actually faced with a similar concern with Myanmar, where the junta seized power and has been widely condemned for its deadly crackdown on human rights. So this takes us back to the recurrent question of Taliban's recognition within the international community. What should then be UN's approach to this dilemma? You've somehow answered it maybe, but I'm also asking this in a sense to understand, as a human rights organization such as Amnesty, how can we continue to hold countries like Myanmar and Afghanistan accountable and continue to monitor human rights violations effectively in this scenario?
There is a strong need for bringing inclusivity and the current governing mechanism that Taliban has introduced. Yeah. Of course, they are not inclusive because they have ignored half of the population firstly, but they have also ignored the rest of the population, like different other ethnic groups that exist in Afghanistan. Secondly, they need to normalize the situation. They need to learn that they are not in battlefield anymore. They have to stop the accusation business that they are continuing, and they are putting they appointed a chairperson for ministry for Kabul University yesterday, who on his first tweet, he goes on record and he says that people were committing adulteries in this university, and people were corrupt, and nobody was working, and I'm going to fix everything. And that kind of messaging is quite disturbing, because you are actually generalizing all those lecturers who hold PhD degrees, who hold master's degree, who have written books, who have educated the younger generation of Afghanistan for decades. You're just insulting them. This is one example of many wrong approaches and wrong mechanisms that Taliban are putting forward. And they are making a mistake. They are clearly making a mistake by thinking that they're still in battlefields, by thinking that they can still insult people and still they still think that they are the only group that they are right and they know everything perfect for Afghanistan. They don't. They don't even understand how to govern, the country. They also come maybe with this knowledge that the way they took control of Afghanistan in a broken shape in '96 after a bloody civil war. They maybe thought that, okay, we are going to Afghanistan with we are going to the same Afghanistan. This is not the same Afghanistan. After 20 years, many things has changed. Of course, everything has not been perfect, but there has been a lot of developments that you cannot ignore. So these are all the things that they need to prove themselves, right? These are all the things that they need to, the words that they're using, they have to put them into practice. That's where, I think there will be an opportunity for their international recognition and for their presence in international platforms like the UN. On your question in terms of what needs to be done is UN has to strongly work on a robust investigation mechanism on the human rights situation in Afghanistan. Similarly, for example, for Myanmar, because unless and until you don't have a fully fledged staffed and resourced mechanism like a fact-finding mission, which is mandated by the UN, you will not be able to oversee the human rights situation in a country like Afghanistan and report back and address those violations in the most needed manner. So this is one of the very critical roles that UN can easily play and can easily provide support to for the human rights of people according to international human rights laws, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and according to several other documents and international instruments that Afghanistan is also a signatory of several of them.
During the chaotic evacuation process, many Afghans were able to leave with the USA and other allies. However, under the current climate of fear and attacks, those still in Afghanistan at risk face immense challenges leaving the country, both through the airports and land borders. And many human rights defenders, as also the Amnesty report indicates, who managed to leave the country are now stranded in military camps or in neighboring countries without knowing their final destination, what will happen in the near future, how they will be able to rebuild their lives that was completely, changed in overnight. So what are the prospects that are waiting for people who are trying to leave Afghanistan? Will people be ever able to reach Europe? And with EU's reluctance, complete, reluctance on this issue, what should we say as refugee rights advocates?
I think, nobody chooses to leave happily his or her country. And this has happened to a lot of Afghans who had to leave the country to save their lives, to save their family lives. Similarly, those Afghans who are right now stuck in Afghanistan, they are not doing this for joy. They're not doing this to leave the country for fun. They don't have choice. They can't work, they can't speak, they can't move, they are beaten up, they are lashed, they are looked after, they can be even killed. And you need to save your life, you need to save your family's life. And this is something that we need to communicate to European governments. We need to communicate to US government, to other governments like Australians, like Canadians, that you need to welcome these group of people in your country, and you need to provide them with all the support that they need, because they have to make these hard decisions for their safety, for their lives, which should be by now it should be clear. I think another call that we are making to European countries especially is that to waiver the visa requirements, to ease down the processes, so that those Afghans who will be able to migrate, they will have the opportunity to reintegrate, and they will have the opportunity to, as you rightly said, to restart from something that they have lost their 20 years of efforts, hard work, and contributions in Afghanistan. And I think it's also to European people that they have to be. I really hope, and my expectation is that, which includes Turkey also, that they stand for Afghan people, that they really pressurize their governments that we need to welcome Afghans, because they are dying. They will be killed if they stay back. And I really hope that there will be humanity and there will be welcome to this group of people who will be, I think, who will be lucky to get a chance to leave the country.
Yeah. Lastly, I want to ask, nearly 50,000 civilians have died in the past 20 years in Afghanistan. US and allied forces, as well as Taliban and other forces, were responsible for these deaths. There was no media attention or international recognition of this war to justify America's intervention. This, of course, meant that Afghans seeking asylum in Europe started to receive rejections and face deportations, deeming Kabul a safe place to return people to. So EU is, unfortunately, despite our expectations and wishful thinking, is keen on keeping this policy and ensure Afghans remain in the region, in the neighboring countries. But the region is already in a humanitarian crisis on migration for years. Afghans do not get protection in neighboring countries like Pakistan and Iran and face discrimination there. And since 2017, with the genocide against Rohingya people from Myanmar, we face another humanitarian crisis in Bangladesh, where more than 20,000 Rohingya refugees are forced to live in camps with little to no international awareness. So what would you say about Western approach to migration? Because we have to look, if we look at this as a region in South Asia, what are the challenges that's waiting for the region now with more Afghan refugees trying to leave the country?
First of all, in the region, I think there is a strong need that international community work closely with neighboring countries so that they open their borders. And at the same time, international community need to provide the needed assistance and support that these refugees will need in these neighboring countries. This is the first and foremost need right now in these countries, because of course the argument that comes from these neighboring countries that we are, as you rightly said, we are already in crisis situation, we are already hosting millions of Afghans, and we are already having our own internal problems. I think that's where, specific aid and specific assistance for Afghan refugees will be extremely important. And the role of organizations like UNHCR would be very key and very critical in this situation. Similarly, in European countries, they need to, they really need to halt completely the forced return of Afghans. They cannot, further betray Afghans by sending them to another level of misery in another third country. They also again need to if you compare European countries to Pakistan and Iran, the number of refugees are quite low. So they need to understand that if Pakistan and Iran can host millions of Afghans, they should have some guts to keep the Afghans who have faced a lot of challenges to arrive where they are in their countries. And again, allocation of assistance and support to these groups, programs for their reintegration, right? Programs for their education, for their children's education, strategies for enabling them to reintegrate in the society and to be part of that acceptance for them will be some of the things that will be extremely important for the European countries to take into consideration.
Yeah. I mean, always the EU makes statements. EU is concerned, EU is deeply concerned. I am actually very concerned about the EU itself. But we see. So as we close and say goodbye, do you still have hope for Afghanistan?
My only hope for Afghanistan is the informed and educated part of the society that have not still given up, that are still pushing every door and are still saying that Afghanistan is our country. We want to work for it. We cannot see it collapse completely. And those voices really give me a lot of hope. Those voices really matter because, we are in a situation where we should not be. We should not have been. We are in a situation where our people did not deserve it. We did not work hard. We did not take personal and professional sacrifices for years. We did not, we did not contribute it for today to be neglected, to be sidelined, to be harassed, to be intimidated. Afghanistan is our country, and we should have, we own our country, and nobody should force us to disown our country. So that is the only hope I have. I don't have any hope from Taliban. I don't have any trust on international community anymore. The only hope is ourselves, the people.
Thank you, Samira, for being here. Thank you for answering all these questions. I appreciate your time. And I also appreciate the work you do for and with women in Afghanistan and for Amnesty. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to everyone who listened to us. I'll see you in 2 weeks again on The Move. Thank you.
Türkiye'nin sivil, bağımsız, özgür ve çoğulcu bir medya ortamına ihtiyacı var. Medyascope 20 Ağustos 2015'te bu ihtiyacı karşılamak üzere yola çıktı. Ama yolumuz uzun. Bu yolculukta bize Patreon veya YouTube'un katıl butonu üzerinden katkıda bulunabilirsiniz. Destek verin, sizinle güçlenelim.